You took a step recently. It may not have felt like a significant one. It may have felt like a survival decision more than a destiny move. The kind of choice you made, not because the path ahead was clear, but because something inside you simply could not stay where it was. There was no ceremony around it. No one handed you a sign that said the timing was right. You moved in the middle of the uncertainty, not after it resolved, and the moment your foot landed on the other side of that threshold, something happened in a dimension you could not see or hear. Something activated, not something small. Something built across a decade of invisible labor finally received the signal it was constructed to respond to. And the signal was you, moving. Psalm 37 verse 23 carries a precision that most people read past. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Not the dramatic steps, not the steps that feel obviously ordained, the ordinary steps of a person whose interior life is oriented toward God. Those are the steps that are made firm. Your step was made firm before you understood what it was activating. Isaiah 43 verse 19 asks, "See, I am doing a new thing, now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" The new thing has already sprung. The question is whether you have recognized it. And there are 4 signs that tell you what to look for. A quietness you have not felt in a long time, not excitement, just stillness underneath the noise. A shift in what fits. Familiar things now feel like they belong to a smaller version of you. A compass settling out of fog towards something true. And a quieter need to explain yourself, less urgency to justify choices before making them. A floor laid beneath the uncertainty that was not there before. These are not signs of confusion. They are signs that the invisible registered your movement before the visible had time to respond. The map of what you stepped into is what comes next. 1. What the last 10 years were actually doing. Most people who survive a long preparation season receive the other side of it, without receiving the full picture of what the hard side was building. They carry the fruit of the decade without understanding its architecture. What I want to give you now is not just the encouragement that the decade was worth it. I want to show you what it was actually constructing, layer by layer, so that when what was built begins to operate, you recognize it as intentional design and not as accident. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 is often quoted as comfort during difficult seasons, and it is that, but it is also a structural claim. "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." The plans are prior to the difficulty. The decade did not interrupt the plan. The decade was inside it. Consider a tree, not the canopy, the bark, the branches reaching upward, the part beneath the surface that no one photographs or acknowledges. For years, sometimes decades, a tree's most critical work occurs entirely underground. The surface remains unchanged, no visible evidence of progress. And then, when the root system is deep enough to sustain the full weight of what is about to grow above it, the emergence is authorized. Not because something suddenly became possible, but because what was always being built finally reached completion. You have been in an underground season. The decade was not delay, it was root work. 3 specific things were constructed during that time, and each one was necessary for what is now authorized to stand above ground. The first is what might be called the load test. You cannot build a person to carry something genuinely large by exposing them only to comfortable conditions. The weight of what was designed for you, the scale of what is now moving toward you, required a specific kind of interior strength that is not produced through reading or intention. It is built through seasons that pushed you past your known limit and then past that limit again. The difficult years were not random. They were calibrated. Your capacity was being expanded to match what was always intended for you, not as punishment, but as precision engineering. The second is the stripping. Versions of you, possibly more than one, had to be left behind during that decade. The version that required constant approval before moving. The version that measured worth by how quickly visible results arrived. The version whose identity was attached to outcomes it could not control. Those versions could not carry what is coming, not because they were failures, but because they were not built for this weight. What was stripped away was not taken from you. It was cleared from your path. The third is the clearing. Relationships that dissolved without a clean explanation. Friendships that faded. Connections that ended in ways that never fully made sense. These were not signs that something was wrong with you. They were the preparation of the environment you are now stepping into. Not everyone can be in the room where the next thing happens. Some people were assigned to specific chapters of your life, and not to all of them. Their exit was not abandonment. It was the invisible preparation of the space. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. The root season had its time. That time has ended. Isaiah 40 verse 31 describes what follows. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. The soaring does not precede the rooting. It follows when the root system is deep enough to sustain the full upward force of what is rising. One more dimension. The underground season built not only depth but width. The interconnected network of character, formed relationships, spiritual perception, and capacity for compassion that can now hold the weight of what is authorized to grow above ground. You are not being formed in isolation. You are being networked invisibly and with precision into what the next season requires. 2. The ancient word that names what is coming. There is a line in the ancient text that most people receive as a comfort and miss entirely as a legal declaration. In Joel 2 verse 25, God speaks to a people who have watched a decade's worth of harvest destroyed. I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. Most people hear that promise and picture a return, going back to where they were before the damage, beginning again from the original starting point. But that is not what the original language carries. The Hebrew word translated as restore in that verse comes from a root connected to the word shalam, the same root family as shalom. And shalam does not mean to return. It carries the weight of a legal verdict, a court judgment. In the ancient legal context, shalam described the ruling of a court that found a thief guilty not merely of the taking but of the full cost of what the theft produced. Every downstream consequence, every opportunity foreclosed, every year of harvest that the loss of what was stolen made impossible. The verdict did not require the thief to return what was taken. It required far more. 4 and 5 times the value, depending on the severity. If the theft cost you 100, Shalam says the verdict requires 400 in return. And God, who issues the verdict, is not constrained by the thief's available resources. He generates the return from his own reserves. What that means for you is not that the years are simply being handed back. It means they are being repaid with compounding return. Think of what 10 years of faithful investment actually accumulates. In the early years, faithfulness builds what might be called the principle, the base of character, trust, spiritual perception, and capacity that is established through consistent obedience when no visible return is in sight. In the middle years, that principle begins to bear a quiet interest. Discernment deepens, the capacity to hold difficulty without being broken by it grows. The interior architecture becomes capable of holding more than it held before. In the later years, the interest compounds on the interest. The entire decade accumulates, not as a sum of its parts, but as a structure in which each layer has been building on every layer beneath it. What arrives now is not a payment for the last step. It is the compound return on the entire decade. The first year's faithfulness multiplied by every year that built on it. That is not a small number. Ephesians 3 verse 20 names the scale. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. The immeasurably more is not poetry. It is the compound return on a decade of investment in a God whose faithfulness does not subtract from the principal while paying the interest. Receive that, not as motivation to carry forward, but as the accurate description of what is already in motion toward you. The Shalam verdict has been issued. The return is compounding. The locust years are not going to be balanced. They are going to be exceeded. Every year the locust ate has an interest rate attached to it in heaven's ledger, and what arrives is not the simple sum of the years. It is the compound value of what those years, now repaid with multiplied return, actually add up to in the economy of a God who does not settle for restoring the original amount. This is not poetry. It is the legal consequence of a verdict issued by a court that does not undervalue what was taken. What comes is not calibrated to what was lost. It is calibrated to the full weight of the judgment and to the faithfulness of the one who enforces it. 3. The formation that the palace required. There is a man in the ancient record whose arc maps almost exactly onto the decade you have walked. He knew from a young age that something significant was assigned to his life. The way you sometimes know a thing before your circumstances confirm it. Then the opposite of his assignment happened. He was betrayed by the people closest to him. He was thrown into a pit and sold. He worked his way up in an unfamiliar household, only to be falsely accused and placed in prison. 13 years passed between the moment God showed him his destiny and the day the door opened. And then it opened, not because he had finally waited long enough, or prayed hard enough, or earned the release through accumulated faithfulness. Genesis 50 verse 20 gives the retrospective on why it opened when it did. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. The harm was real and the betrayal was genuine, but neither was the final author of the outcome. Beneath both ran a purpose that had a longer view than any human plan set against it. What Psalm 105 verse 19 names about Joseph's years in prison is worth reading closely. Until the time came to fulfill his dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character. The testing was not incidental to the timeline. It was the mechanism of the timeline. The door did not open because enough time had elapsed. It opened because a specific work, the formation of a specific character, had reached completion. The formation was the qualification. Endurance was the vehicle. Character was the destination. But here is the dimension of Joseph's story that most retellings miss. When the day finally came for the door to open, it opened not because Joseph had positioned himself correctly or networked his way toward an opportunity. It opened because Pharaoh had two dreams that no one in the palace could interpret. The most powerful ruler in the known world, surrounded by the finest minds of the ancient world, could not decode what his own sleeping mind had produced. And the person who could, the decoder, was already in position, already prepared, already refined to the exact specification the problem required. God did not release Joseph from the prison first and then create the problem that needed him. He created the problem first. Or he arranged for Pharaoh to dream before the door opened. And then the problem, the undercoded dream in the mind of the most powerful ruler in the known world, went looking for the person already prepared to interpret it. The prison made Joseph the decoder before the dream that needed decoding had even been dreamed. Consider what that means. The problem that will present itself in your next chapter, the situation that needs exactly the combination of discernment, endurance, and clarity that you now carry, may not yet have fully materialized. It may be forming, and when it does, it will not go looking for someone who seems qualified. It will find the person already positioned. That person is you. The decade was not merely endurance. It was positioning. You have been in that place. The formation that occurred in your decade did not simply build patience or endurance or resilience. It built something specific, the precise capacity that the situation now approaching you requires. Romans 8 verse 28 names the governing principle. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. The all things includes the prison years. It includes the years of false accusation. It includes the 13 years of formation that looked nothing like the dream that started it. Every piece of the preparation was being worked toward the same end. A person who could hold the weight of what the next chapter required without being destroyed by it. What was built in the prison was not merely patience. It was precision, the specific kind of character that can govern without being corrupted by governance. That can hold authority without being consumed by it. That can look at what came against it and choose mercy rather than retaliation, because the prison built in Joseph something the comfort of his father's house could not have built. You have been built to the same specification. The dream is about to need its decoder. You are already in position. 4. The 5 things that are now true about you. What follows is not a list of aspirations or goals to work toward. These are descriptions of what the decade produced, evidenced not by what you claimed about yourself, but by what you survived. Receive them not as encouragement, but as accurate information about who you now are. You are a pioneer. Not as a motivational label, but in the most precise sense. Someone who creates the path by walking it first without a map, often without company, often anyone ahead who can say with certainty that this direction is right. There were seasons in the last 10 years where you chose a direction without external confirmation. You moved on something you felt underneath the noise, rather than something you could point to and explain. That is not stubbornness. That is the qualifying characteristic of someone who was always meant to go first. Others will walk a road one day because you made it through without one. You are a spiritual warrior. A warrior is not someone who is never afraid. A warrior is someone who feels the full weight of what opposes them and does not allow that weight to become the final decision. There were moments in the last 10 years where stopping would have been the rational, defensible choice, where everyone watching from the outside would have called the exit reasonable. You did not exit. That is not luck. That is a specific kind of strength built through seasons that asked more of you than comfort could have produced. You are a cycle breaker. The step you took recently did not only move you forward, it ended something. A pattern that had been running, possibly longer than just your own story, was interrupted by the move you made. What comes forward will not carry that pattern. The next chapter of your life, and the lives connected to yours, will not be shaped by what shaped the last 10 years. That interruption required exactly the formation you went through to make it possible. You are a builder. What is coming toward you is not simply for you. It carries a weight that tells you it was designed to bear something beyond your own life. A structure others will stand on, a space people will enter, something that will carry people who have not yet arrived at the threshold you just crossed. The size of what was prepared makes more sense when you understand it was never only designed to fit inside the borders of one personal story. You are a seer. Before your conscious mind confirmed the timing of the step you took, something in you already knew. The move was not fully logical. It did not wait for the evidence to complete itself. Something sharpened through years of paying attention in seasons where there was very little obvious to pay attention to, sensed the moment and moved. That perception is not luck. It is a faculty formed through exactly the long and quiet season you walked. Ephesians 2 verse 10 names the origin of all 5. We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. These identities are dimensions of the handiwork, not achievements you assembled. And 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 names the Spirit that makes each one operative. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Power for the pioneer and the warrior, love for the builder and the cycle breaker, a sound, clear mind for the seer. One more thing, these 5 were not built sequentially. They were built simultaneously, each strengthening the ones around it. The pioneer required the warrior to keep moving without a map. The warrior required the seer to know what was actually happening beneath the opposition. The seer required the builder to understand that what was perceived was meant to be constructed. And the cycle breaker is the result of all 4 together. These are not separate traits. They are one character forged in one sustained fire. 5. The pattern that shows up after every activation. Within the next day or 2, possibly already, a voice will arrive. It will not be loud. Loud would be easier to dismiss. It will come in the specific register of your own interior monologue, using the vocabulary that has the most access to your particular doubt. It will say something like, maybe the step you took was just a practical decision and not a spiritual threshold. Maybe the weight you felt in it was your own need for significance, imposing meaning on an ordinary event. Maybe the stillness you sensed afterward was just relief, not activation. Maybe you read the signs wrong. This is not a signal from above. Hear that clearly, because the voice will carry itself with the tone of honest self-reflection, and that tone gives it a credibility that does not belong to it. What you are hearing is a nervous system response, the internal protection mechanism of a person who spent a decade pressing towards something without consistent, visible confirmation, and who learned to hedge as a survival strategy. The doubt is not evidence against the step. It is evidence of how much the decade cost. It is the voice of someone who has been through something genuinely heavy saying, in the most protective way it knows, "Are you sure you can trust this? Be careful. You have been disappointed before. Receive it as testimony, not instruction." The doubt is telling the truth about the decade. It is simply drawing the wrong conclusion from the truth it is telling. Runners who have trained for distance will recognize a phenomenon called the dead zone. It arrives several miles in, not at the beginning, not near the end, but at the specific point where the body has exhausted its initial stores and has not yet made the transition to what sustains the rest of the race. The signals it sends feel completely identical to genuine depletion. The legs say stop. The entire body says this is the end. An untrained runner stops. The trained runner does not because the signals are less intense, but because they know where in the race the dead zone falls. The signals are real. Their interpretation is not. The post-activation doubt is the spiritual dead zone. It arrives at a predictable point, right after the threshold has been crossed, right when the activation is real, but the evidence is not yet visible. It sends signals that feel identical to genuine spiritual concern. It uses the language of wisdom and discernment. And the person who has not been through this particular pattern before is likely to heed it and pull back from what they just moved into. Hebrews 10 verse 36 names the specific quality needed at exactly this point. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. The perseverance reference there is not the perseverance of the decade that preceded the step. It is the perseverance of the gap, the period after the will has been done and before the promise has been received. The hardest perseverance is not the one that keeps you going toward the threshold. It is the one that holds you in position after you have crossed it. Habakkuk 2 verse 3 was written for exactly this gap. The vision is yet for an appointed time, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not delay. The vision was not cancelled when the evidence did not immediately appear. It has an appointment. The doubt is not the last word on the matter. The appointment is. You are allowed to be uncertain while in motion. You do not owe anyone a performance of absolute confidence. The pioneer does not move because the road is visible. The pioneer moves because the direction is known. You do not need to see clearly to walk faithfully. You only need to keep moving in the direction the knowing underneath the fear is pointing. What you cannot afford is to let the dead zone convince you to turn back. It can absorb uncertainty, stumbling, confusion, even backward steps that get corrected. The one thing it cannot absorb is the permanent exit made in the dead zone because the signals felt like truth. Stay in motion, the signals will change. 6. The 3 markers and the mega revelation. 3 markers distinguish a threshold move from an ordinary decision, not to create doubt about what you already sensed, to give you the specific language for what you are carrying. The first marker is that it cost something real, not discomfort, not inconvenience, something that was load bearing in your life before you released it, a security, an identity, a relationship, a version of a plan that had been in place long enough to feel like the actual plan. The move that crosses a threshold is always the one that requires releasing something you had previously classified as necessary. The cost is not measured in how difficult it was, it is measured in what it was attached to. The second marker is that it was made before the outcome was confirmed. The threshold move was not a step taken after the path out became clear. You moved while the fog was still present. You committed before the evidence completed itself. This is not recklessness. It is the specific signature of a move that heaven was waiting for, rather than a move that heaven was simply watching. What cannot be measured in advance cannot be responded to in advance. You stepped before you could see the ground, and the ground was there. The third marker is the one beneath the fear. There was a knowing, not eliminating the fear, but operating alongside it and underneath it. A settled sense, distinct from the anxiety about what might happen, that this was the right direction. Not certainty about the outcome. Certainty about the movement. Those are not the same thing. The fear was real. The knowing was also real, and the knowing held the floor while the fear occupied the walls. If all three are present in what you recently did, then what I am about to tell you is not encouragement. It is accurate information. The step you took did not activate the blessing. The step you took was the culmination of 10 years of activations. Every act of faithfulness in the last decade was itself an activation, not a deposit into a future account that would eventually be large enough to matter, but an immediate activation of something specific in the invisible architecture of what God was building. Every decision made in integrity, when the dishonest choice would have been easier, was an activation. Every act of care extended in a season where no one was measuring was an activation. Every morning you woke up and chose to remain oriented toward God in a period when that orientation produced nothing visible was an activation. Every boundary held, every promise kept, every step taken in the dark without knowing where your foot would land, each one was a note played in a chord that has been building for a decade. Galatians 6 verse 9 described exactly where you were in every one of those moments. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. The proper time was arriving through every activation, and now the proper time has arrived. In music, a chord is not several notes played simultaneously. It is a specific mathematical relationship between frequencies that resolves into a harmonic structure none of the individual notes could produce alone. When the final note is added, the sound does not simply become louder. What was tension becomes resolution. What was incomplete becomes whole. The step you took was the final note. What is now resonating is not the step. It is the entire chord the decade built, the accumulated resonance of every note that preceded it, held in a relationship that produces something none of them could have produced alone. Joshua 3 verse 15 to 16 is the paradigm. The priests carried the ark into the Jordan, and their feet touched the water before the river parted. The movement preceded the miracle. The last step completed the activation. The waters did not part to make the crossing easier. They parted because the crossing had already begun. Your step is what made the chord complete. What opens now is proportional, not to that one step, but to the entire decade that made that one step possible. When? What to do in the space between the activation and the evidence? There is a gap. The activation is real. The evidence has not yet fully materialized. This is the most important period to steward correctly, because it is the period most likely to be misread, either as confirmation that the step was wrong, or as an invitation to force what has not yet fully formed, or simply as time to wait without intention. None of those readings is right. The gap requires specific practices. The first and most significant practice is a shift in the posture of prayer. Before the threshold, most of the prayers you brought to God were petitionary, asking for what was not yet present, seeking confirmation of what had not yet arrived, requesting provision of what had not yet been given. That posture served the season it belonged to. The gap between activation and evidence calls for a different kind of prayer, not petitionary but receptive. Instead of asking for what was activated, you begin thanking for what is in motion. Not as a performance of certainty, not as a declaration of something you have to convince yourself is true, but as the natural response of someone who has received a verdict and is living in the time between the verdict and its execution. Philippians 4 verse 6 does not eliminate the petition, but it adds the dimension that transforms the posture. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. The thanksgiving is not added to make the petition more effective. It is the acknowledgement that something has already been released, that the request has been received and acted upon, and that what you are now living in is the movement between the verdict and its visible arrival. This is not presumption. This is cooperation with what heaven has already set in motion. The second practice is documentation. In the days and weeks following an activation, small confirmations will arrive. A conversation that opens from an unexpected direction. A connection made without effort in an area directly related to what you stepped into. A door that moved without you pushing it. A piece of clarity settling over a decision that had been resisting resolution. These are not coincidences. They are the early installments of the return, the first signs of movement in a river that has been released upstream. Write them down, not because you need the record to believe, but because memory is not neutral when doubt returns. When the dead zone arrives again, memory will try to revise what happened. It will suggest that the conversation was less significant than it felt. It will flatten what seemed meaningful into coincidence. It will reframe the clarity as wishful thinking. The written record makes the confirmation non-negotiable. The date, the specific detail, the name of the person, the subject of the conversation, the door that opened without your hand on the knob. Write it before the doubt returns to edit it. The record is not a crutch for weak faith. It is the testimony that weak faith needs to become strong. Luke 17 verse 14 gives the gap period its operating principle. The 10 lepers were sent before they were healed, while they were still unclean, and the record says they were healed as they went. The going preceded the seeing. Movement in the direction of the activation preceded the visible evidence of it. Begin moving in the direction the activation is pointing, not forcing the outcome but positioning. The seed breaks open underground before the first shoot is visible at the surface. The direction of the growth is already set. Position yourself in the direction the shoot is heading. Proverbs 4 verse 18 gives the arc of this gap period its right name. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. The gap is not darkness, it is pre-dawn. The light is already present and already increasing. What you are in is not an absence of the evidence. It is the early brightening of a day that has already begun. The full light of day is coming, and it is coming not as a distant future event, but as the natural continuation of a light that is already right now shining. The decade is behind you, not simply survived, completed. You did not make it through 10 years of formation. You arrived at the end of a construction project. The building is done. The door is open. 3 things to carry forward. The first, do not minimize the step. There will be people who ask what you did and receive a smaller answer than the one that is true. Not because you are dishonest, but because you are practiced at making yourself easier to receive. This is not that season. You do not owe anyone a reduced version of what God has confirmed. The second, steward the silence around what is building. What has been activated does not need to be announced before it's formed. A seed breaking through the surface is most vulnerable at the moment of emergence. Not everything growing needs a crowd watching the early stages. Protect the process. Let what is building build before it meets the weight of other people's well-meaning qualifications. The third, learn to receive small confirmations as early installments. The compound return will not arrive all at once. A conversation, an opportunity, a sudden clarity. These are the first payments of a shalam verdict calibrated to return far more than what the decade cost. Receive each one as the beginning of a restoration too large to arrive in a single moment. Philippians 1 verse 6 is the ground beneath all of it. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. The one who built the root system is the same one who authorized the emergence. What he began in the first year of the decade, he will complete in every year that follows this threshold, and in every year after that, because the completion of one chapter of his work is never the end of his faithfulness, but the beginning of the next expression of it. Not because you are perfect, but because he is faithful to the works of his own hands. The decade did not cost you 10 years. It built 10 years of return into what is now authorized to arrive. Before we close what was opened in this message, I want to invite you into something more important than any point that was made here. Come into prayer with me right now, wherever you are sitting. Not to perform anything, just to bring what has been named before the one who was building it all while you were inside it, enduring it. Father, we come to you carrying something we did not fully understand until this message named it. A decade of construction that looked from the inside like confusion, loss, and the absence of visible progress. And you were there in all of it, at the root level, building what the surface could not yet show. We acknowledge the work of your hands in the years that felt like wilderness. We receive what you built in them. For every person who took a step recently and doubted it afterward, let this be the moment the doubt loses its authority. Not because the uncertainty has resolved, but because you are more trustworthy than the uncertainty is alarming. Let the known character of the one who ordered their steps be louder than the unfamiliar feeling of standing on what they cannot yet fully see. Let the shalam verdict land in every spirit hearing this, not as a doctrinal concept, but as a personal, specific, irreversible declaration over their actual life. The years, the relationships, the opportunities, the time, the energy, the hope that was deferred so long it began to feel like permanent absence. You do not balance the equation, you exceed it. You are not a God of barely restored. You are the God of compounding return, of pressed down and shaken together and running over, of immeasurably more than what the decade of faithfulness could have asked for on its most hopeful morning. Let them receive that today, not as motivation to press further, but as the recognition of what you have already released and what is already in motion toward them. For those who are in the gap between the activation and the visible evidence, protect what is building in that space. Guard it from the premature exposure that collapses things before they are strong enough to stand. Guard it from the well-meaning voices that will try to explain what is happening in terms that fit the previous season. Guard it from the impatience that mistakes slowness for stillness and stillness for absence. And guard it equally from the withdrawal that misreads the gap as failure. Let them hold the space between what was activated and what is emerging with the same faithfulness that characterized the decade that preceded it, knowing that the gap is not the delay, the gap is the delivery in progress. Let the 5 identities land, not as aspirations but as accurate descriptions: pioneer, warrior, cycle breaker, builder, seer. Let each one settle in the spirit of the person who spent 10 years becoming it without hearing it named. Let what was built in the fire be recognized in the light for what it actually is, not what the decade said about them from the outside, but what you built in them from the inside. Release what was held in trust across the decade. Begin the compound return. Let what arrives be proportional not to the last step, but to the full decade that made the last step possible. And let those who receive it know, clearly, undeniably, at the interior level where only you can reach, that the return did not come because they performed well. It came because you are faithful and your word does not return to you empty. In the name of Jesus, who crossed his own threshold and bore the cost of it, so that ours could be opened without us having to bear what he bore. Amen.